Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Gerard Pratt, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is Sergeant Carmen Canning. Tonight, we also acknowledge participants of the Navy's Indigenous Development Program. And as always, we welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors and students on behalf of the following schools. From Victoria, Wembley Primary School, Calcott Lodge Primary School, and St Monica's Primary School. I invite you now to all please stand and join in singing the National Anthem. Students, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through until the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Lieutenant Ronald Grahame Henderson. Ronald Grahame Henderson was born in North Sydney on the 5th of July 1892 to Stephen and Helen Henderson. After attending Sydney Grammar School, he worked as a bank clerk at the Commonwealth Bank. In April 1915, Henderson enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force. He joined at the large army camp in Liverpool outside Sydney, where he trained for 6 months. In October, he sailed to Egypt on the transport ship the Themistocles. At the Australian Army camp in Tel el-Kebir, Henderson completed further training and joined the 18th Australian Infantry Battalion. Showing leadership potential, he was promoted to the rank of corporal. In March 1916, the Australians sailed for France to join the fighting on the Western Front. The 18th Battalion moved into the frontline trenches in May and began digging and reinforcing trenches and fortifications. In early June, the Germans shelled the unit's position in order to divert attention from a raid they were carrying out to the north. During this barrage, Henderson was struck by a shell fragment in his leg. He was evacuated to England to recover. His parents were informed the wound was mild, and Henderson returned to France in September. On his return, he was promoted to sergeant. With clerical skills from his days as a bank clerk, Henderson showed a great ability to communicate intelligence about enemy positions. In November 1916, he was selected for officer training, which he undertook in England at Balliol College, Oxford. In March 1917, he was appointed second lieutenant and returned to the 18th Battalion in France. The battalion was involved in the Battle of Bullecourt in May, after which Henderson was promoted to the rank of lieutenant. He was now an intelligence officer in the headquarters of the Australian 5th Brigade. In his role, Henderson collected intelligence about troop movements, trench maps, and artillery positions. The 18th Battalion was involved in the fighting at Menin Road in September, then at the Battle of Polkapel in early October 1917. During the battle, Henderson was badly wounded by shell fragments in both arms. He had refused to leave his post at brigade headquarters, despite a heavy German artillery barrage. By staying in his post, he was able to relay valuable information about the enemy's position to his superior officers. For his actions, Henderson was awarded the Military Cross. He was again evacuated to England and spent 4 months at Cobham Convalescent Home in Kent, recovering from his injuries. Because his hand had not fully healed, he was sent to work as an instructor in intelligence gathering at the Australian Corps School in France during the month of March. By the end of his time there, he had recovered sufficiently to return to his unit. In March 1918, the German army launched what would be its final major assault of the war, which became known as the German Spring Offensive. Key objective for the German forces in this attack was to capture the rail hub city of Amiens and split the British forces in the north from their French allies in the south. British and Australian forces managed to halt the offensive in April at the town of Villers-Bretonneux, less than 30 kilometres from Amiens. Henderson and the 18th Battalion were stationed at the town to help stop the German advance. In the first week of April, the 18th Battalion was in the front line at Villers-Bretonneux, during which time the men were targeted by German artillery and machine gun fire. At the end of the week, the unit was relieved and the men moved to billets at the smaller village of Gentel, behind the front lines. The battalion's war diary noted that this village's civilian population had evacuated in the face of the fighting, so there was plenty of straw for the men to sleep on, and the men had their first decent sleep for over a week. At 6 a.m. the next morning, the 9th of April, 1918, the men were woken by a German artillery barrage falling on the village of Gentel. The unit rapidly moved to a nearby field and dug in, but Henderson was killed in the village by shell fire. He was 25 years old. Ronald Henderson is buried in Adelaide Military Cemetery at Villas Breton Hoe. His younger brother, Private Hugh Grahame Henderson of the 35th Battalion, had died of wounds only 5 days earlier. The graves of the two men lie next to each other. Lieutenant Ronald Grahame Henderson is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right among almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. His headstone is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Lieutenant Ronald Grahame Henderson, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli with his poor tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you all for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.